in accordance with Resolution 51/241. I now give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, just 9 days ago, many of the world's challenges coalesced in an awful hellscape. Thousands of people in Derna, Libya, lost their lives in epic, unprecedented flooding. They were victims many times over, victims of years of conflict, victims of climate chaos, victims of leaders, near and far, who failed to find a way to peace. The people of Derna lived and died in the epicenter of that indifference, as the skies unleashed 100 times the monthly rainfall in 24 hours, as dams broke after years of war and neglect, as everything they knew was wiped off the map. Even now, as we speak, bodies are washing ashore from the same Mediterranean Sea where billionaires sunbathe on their super yachts. Derna is a sad snapshot of the state of our world. The flood of inequity, of injustice, of inability to confront the challenges in our midst. Excellencies, our world is becoming unhinged. Geopolitical tensions are rising. Global challenges are mounting, and we seem incapable of coming together to respond. We confront a host of existential threats, from the climate crisis to disruptive technologies, and we do so at a time of chaotic transition. For much of the Cold War, international relations were largely seen through the prism of two superpowers. Then came a short period of unipolarity. Now we are rapidly moving towards a multipolar world. And this is in many ways positive. It brings new opportunities for justice and balance in international relations. But multipolarity alone cannot guarantee peace. At the beginning of the 20th century, Europe had numerous powers. It was truly multipolar, but it lacked robust multilateral institutions, and the result was World War I. A multipolar world needs strong and effective multilateral institutions. Yet, global governance is stuck in time. Look no further than the United Nations Security Council and the Bretton Woods system. They reflect the political and economic realities of 1945, when many countries in this assembly hall were still under colonial domination. The world has changed. Our institutions have not. We cannot effectively address problems as they are if institutions do not reflect the world as it is. Instead of solving problems, they risk becoming part of the problem. And indeed, divides are deepening. Divides among economic and military powers, divides between North and South, East and West. We are inching ever closer to a great fracture in economic and financial systems and trade relations, one that threatens a single open internet with diverging strategies on technology and artificial intelligence and potentially clashing security frameworks. It is high time to renew multilateral institutions based on 21st century economic and political realities rooted in equity, solidarity, and universality, and anchored in the principles of the United Nations Charter and international law. That means reforming the Security Council in line with the world of today. It means redesigning the international financial architecture so that it becomes truly universal and serves as a global safety net for developing countries in trouble. I have no illusions. Reforms are a question of power. And I know there are many competing interests and agendas. But the alternative to reform is not the status quo. The alternative to reform is further fragmentation. It is reform or rupture. At the same time, divides are also widening within countries. Democracy is under threat. Authoritarianism is on the march. Inequalities are growing, and hate speech is on the rise. In the face of all these challenges and more, compromise has become a dirty word. Our world needs statesmanship, not gamesmanship and gridlock. As I told in the G20, it is time for a global compromise. Politics is compromise. Diplomacy is compromise. Effective leadership is compromise. Leaders have a social responsibility to achieve compromise in building a common future of peace and prosperity for our common good. Excellencies, over the past year we have shown the promise of multilateral action. With important new agreements on safeguarding biodiversity, on protecting the high seas, on climate loss and damage, on the right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment. We have all the tools and resources to solve our shared challenges. What we need is determination. And determination is in the DNA of our United Nations, summoning us with the first words of the Charter. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined. Determined to end the scourge of war. Determined to reaffirm faith in human rights. Determined to uphold justice and respect international law. And determined to promote social progress and better lives for all people. It falls to us, through our actions, to apply that determination to the challenges of today, being faithful to the Charter of the United Nations. Excellencies, it starts with determination to uphold the Charter's pledge for peace. Yet, instead of ending the scourge of war, we are seeing a surge of conflicts, coups and chaos. If every country fulfilled its obligations under the Charter, the right to peace would be guaranteed. When countries break those pledges, they create a world of insecurity for everyone. Exhibit A, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The war, in violation of the United Nations Charter and international law, has unleashed a nexus of horror. Lives destroyed, human rights abused, families torn apart, children traumatized, hopes and dreams shattered. But beyond Ukraine, the war has serious implications for us all. Nuclear threats put us all at risk. Ignoring global treaties and conventions makes us all less safe. And the poisoning of global diplomacy obstructs progress across the board. We must not relent in working for peace, a just peace in line with the UN Charter and international law. And even while fighting rages, we must pursue every avenue to ease the suffering of civilians in Ukraine and beyond. The Black Sea Initiative was one such avenue. The world badly needs Ukrainian food and Russian food and fertilizers to stabilize markets and guarantee food security. And I will not give up on my efforts to make it happen. Excellencies, Excellencies, around the globe, old tensions fester while new risks emerge. Nuclear disarmament is at a standstill while countries develop new weapons and make new threats. Across the Sahel, a series of coups is further destabilizing the region as terrorism is gaining ground. Sudan is descending into full-scale civil war. Millions have fled, and the country risks splitting apart. In Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, millions are displaced, and gender-based violence is a horrific daily reality. in Haiti, a country that suffered centuries of colonial exploitation, is today overwhelmed by gang violence and still awaits international support. In Afghanistan, a staggering 70% of the population needs humanitarian assistance, with the rights of women and girls systematically denied. In Myanmar, brutal violence, worsening poverty, and repression are crushing hopes for a return to democracy. In the Middle East, escalating violence and bloodshed in the occupied Palestinian territory is taking a terrible toll on civilians. Unilateral actions are intensifying and undermining the possibility of a two-state solution, the only pathway to lasting peace and security for Palestinians and Israelis. Syria remains in ruins, while peace remains remote. And meanwhile, natural disasters are worsening the man-made disaster of conflict. In the face of this mounting crisis, the global humanitarian system is on the verge of collapse. Needs are rising, and funding is drying up. Our humanitarian operations are being forced to make massive cuts. But if we don't feed the hungry, we are feeding conflict. And I urge all countries to step up and to fund fully our global humanitarian appeal. Excellencies, the peace and security architecture is under unprecedented strain. That is why, in the context of the preparations for the Summit of the Future, we put forward ideas for the consideration of member states for a new agenda for peace based on the Charter and international law. It provides a unifying vision to address existing and new threats for a world in transition, calling on states to recommit to hold free from nuclear weapons and to end the erosion of the nuclear disarmament and arms control regime, bolstering prevention at the global level by maximizing the capacity and convening power of the UN and our good offices to bridge geopolitical divides, bolstering prevention at the national level by linking actions for peace with progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, putting women's leadership and participation at the center of decision-making, and committing to the eradication of all forms of violence against women, calling for a broad-based reflection on peacekeeping and make it nimbler and more adaptable with forward-looking transition and exit strategies from the start, and supporting peace enforcement action by regional organizations, notably the African Union, with Security Council clear mandates and predictable funding. Determination for peace also requires new governance frameworks for emerging threats, from artificial intelligence to little autonomous weapons that function without human control. Excellencies, peace is inextricably linked to sustainable development. We see a familiar pattern around the world. The closer a country is to conflict, the further it is far from the Sustainable Development Goals. The Charter calls on us to be determined in promoting social progress. In 21st century terms, that means achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Yet inequality defines our time. From cities where skyscrapers tower over slums, to countries that are forced to choose between serving their people or serving their debts. Today, Africa spends more on debt interest than on health care. Yesterday's SDG Summit was about a global rescue plan to scale up support from billions to trillions. And Excellencies, the international financial architecture remains dysfunctional, outdated, and unjust. And the deep reforms that are needed won't happen overnight, but we can take determined steps now to help countries where the crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic have dramatically impacted. By urgently advancing the SDG stimulus of $500 billion per year and relieving the financial burden on developing and emerging economies. By scaling up development and climate finance, increasing the capital base and changing the business model of multilateral development banks, by ensuring effective debt relief mechanisms and channeling emergency financial support towards those in greatest needs. Excellencies, we must be determined to tackle the most immediate threat to our future, our overheating planet. Climate change is not just a change in the weather. Climate change is changing life on our planet. It is affecting every aspect of our work. It is killing people and devastating communities. Around the world, we see not only accelerating temperatures, we see an acceleration in sea levels rising, glaciers receding, deadly diseases spreading, the extinction of species and cities under threat. And this is only the beginning. We have just survived the hottest days, the hottest months, and the hottest summer on the books. Behind every broken record are broken economies, broken lives, and whole nations at the breaking point. Every continent, every region, and every country is feeling the heat. But I'm not sure all leaders are feeling that heat. Actions are failing abysmally short. There is still time to keep rising temperatures within the 1.5-degree limits of the Paris Agreement, but that requires drastic steps now to cut greenhouse gas emissions and to ensure climate justice for those who did least to cause the crisis but are paying the highest price. We have the receipts. G20 countries are responsible for 80% of greenhouse emissions. They must lead. They must break their addiction to fossil fuels, stop new coal. Indeed, the International Energy Agency's findings that new oil and gas licensing by them is incompatible with keeping the 1.5-degree limit alive. To stand a fighting chance of limiting global temperature rise, we must phase out coal, oil and gas in a fair and equitable way and massively boost renewables. This is the only path to affordable, renewable energy for all. And unfortunately, many still in Africa, mainly in Africa, still lack electricity. So the fossil fuel age has failed. If fossil fuel companies want to be part of the solution, they must lead the transition to renewable energy. No more dirty production. No more fake solutions. No more bankrolling climate denial. I have laid out a climate solidarity pact in which all big emitters are asked to make extra efforts to cut emissions, and wealthier countries support emerging economies with finance and technology to do so. For example, Africa has 60% of the world's solar capacity, but just 2% of renewable investments. And I've also put forward an acceleration agenda to supercharge these efforts. Developed countries must reach net zero as close as possible to 2040, and emerging economies as close as possible to 2050, in line with common but differentiated responsibilities. And immediate steps include an end to coal by 2030 for OECD countries and 2040 for the rest of the world. An end to fossil fuel subsidies and the price on carbon. Developed countries must also finally deliver the $100 billion for developing country climate action as promised, double adaptation finance by 2025 as promised, and replenish the Green Climate Fund as promised. And all countries must work to operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund this year and ensure universal early warning coverage by 2027. Tomorrow, I will welcome credible first movers and doers to our Climate Ambition Summit. And COP28 is around the corner. Climate chaos is breaking new records, but we cannot afford the same old broken record of scapegoating and waiting for others to move first. And to all those working, marching, and championing real climate action, I want you to know that you are on the right side of history and that I am with you. I won't give up this fight of our lives. Excellence.
Excellencies. We must also be determined to honour the Charter's commitment to fundamental human rights. Just 4 women signed our founding document. One look around this room shows that not enough has changed. We the peoples does not mean we the men. Women are still waiting for equal opportunities and equal pay. Women are still waiting for equal opportunities and equal pay, for equality under the law, for their work to be valued and their opinions to count. Around the globe, women's rights, including sexual and reproductive rights, are being suppressed and even rolled back, and women's freedoms curtailed. In some countries, women and girls are punished for wearing too many clothes. In others, for wearing too few. Thanks to generations of women's rights activists, times are changing. From sports field to schools and public squares, girls and women are challenging the patriarchy and winning. I stand with them. I entered this office with a commitment to ensure gender parity at the UN. We have achieved that at senior levels and are on track to do so across the UN system. Because gender equality is not the problem. Gender equality is the solution. It is not a favour to women. It is a fundamental condition to ensuring a better future for all. Excellencies, we must be determined to answer the call to action to put human rights at the heart of our work. 75 years after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there has been enormous progress in some areas, from ending colonization and segregation to ensuring women's voting rights. But we have not achieved basic rights for all. When 1.2 billion people still live in acute poverty and hunger is at levels not seen since 2005. When discrimination on racial and ethnic grounds is perfectly legal in many countries. When people must risk death to seek a better life. When refugees, migrants and minorities are routinely demonized and hounded. When declaring your gender identity or simply who you love can lead to imprisonment or even execution. When speaking out can lead to perilous consequences. Human rights, political, civil, economic, social and cultural, are the key to solving many of the world's interlinked problems. Laws to protect the vulnerable must be enacted and enforced. The targeting of minorities must stop, and human rights and human dignity must be at the centre of social, economic and migration policies. All governments must fulfil the commitment they made in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Excelências.
Excellencies, we must also face up to the looming threats posed to human rights by new technologies. Generative artificial intelligence holds much promise, but it may also lead us across a Rubicon and into more danger than we can control. When I mentioned artificial intelligence in my General Assembly speech in 2017, only 2 other leaders even uttered the term. Now AI is on everyone's lips, a subject of both awe and fear. Even some of those who developed generative AI are calling for greater regulation. But many of the dangers of digital technology are not looming on the horizon, they are here. The digital divide is inflaming inequalities. Hate speech, disinformation and conspiracy theories on social media platforms are spread and amplified by AI, undermining democracy and fueling violence and conflict in real life. Online surveillance and data harvesting are enabling human rights abuses on a mass scale. And technology companies and governments are far from finding solutions.
We must move fast and mend things. New technologies require new innovative forms of governance. with input from experts building this technology and from those monitoring its abuses. And we urgently need a global digital compact between governments, regional organizations, the private sector and civil society to mitigate the risks of digital technologies and identify ways to harness their benefits for the good of humanity. Some have called for consideration of a new global entity on AI that could provide a source of information and expertise for member states. There are many different models, inspired by such examples as the International Atomic Energy Agency, the International Civil Aviation Organization, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And the UN stands ready to host the global and inclusive discussions that are needed, depending on the decisions of member states. To help advance the search for concrete governance solutions, I will appoint this month a high-level advisory body on artificial intelligence, which will provide recommendations by the end of this year. And next year's Summit of the Future is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for progress to deal with these new threats in line with the vision of the UN Charter. Member states will decide how to move forward on the new agenda for peace, the Global Digital Compact, reforms to the international financial architecture, and many other proposals to address challenges and bring greater justice and equity to global governance. Excellencies, the United Nations was created precisely for moments like these, moments of maximum danger and minimum agreement. We can and must use our tools in flexible and creative ways. Last month, we saw the dividends of determination off the coast of Yemen. Carrying 1 million barrels of oil, the decaying FSO Safar supertanker was a ticking time bomb, a looming ecological disaster in the Red Sea. But no one offered to solve the problem. So the United Nations stepped in and brought the world together. We mobilized resources, assembled the experts, navigated difficult negotiations and built trust. We have more work ahead and more resources are needed. But last month, the oil was successfully transferred from the Safar. This UN-led action saved the Red Sea. When no one else could or would, UN determination got the job done. Despite our long list of global challenges, that same spirit of determination can guide us forward. Let us be determined to heal divisions and forge peace, determined to uphold the dignity and worth of every person, determined to realize the Sustainable Development Goals and effectively leave no one behind, determined to reform multilateralism for the 21st century and come together for the common good. And I thank you.
I thank the Secretary General. The Assembly will now turn to Agenda Item 8, entitled General Debate. Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, Honorable Ministers, distinguished delegates, and all stakeholders here present. Good morning. It is my honor and privilege as President of the United Nations General Assembly to welcome you to this hall for the opening of the General Debate of the 78th session. Allow me to acknowledge in our midst today several presidents, former presidents of the General Assembly, including His Excellency Han Sang-soo, former Prime Minister of Korea, who served as President of the 56th session of the Assembly, and who now sits as Chair of the UN Council of Former Presidents of the General Assembly. Together, this Assembly Hall and this rostrum stand as a living testament to multilateralism and to the extraordinary role and compelling influence of the United Nations over the 75 years of its existence. It is a unique and truly global platform for debate, dialogue, and problem solving through multilateral diplomacy. This year, our imperative is clear: to unite the nations, to be united in conviction of common purpose and in solidarity of joint action. Excellencies, such a common coordinated approach is needed now as much as at any point in our history. War, climate change, debt, energy and food crises, poverty and famine. These crises are directly impacting the lives and well-being of billions of people around the world. They are rolling back decades of hard-won development gains and thus condemning millions to lifelong intergenerational poverty and hardship. It is at times like these that we must search deep within to find our better selves and our common humanity that impels us to meet the moment. I therefore implore you, let us use this forum for that which it was intended. Let us listen and learn. Let us rebuild trust and reignite global solidarity. And let us find common ground to address the challenges we face. In the words of the late, great Madeleine Albright, if the UN did not exist, we would have to invent it. We are fortunate, therefore, that it does indeed exist. Let us therefore make full and effective use of this unparalleled resource. Excellencies, this message is all the more important in light of the continued violation of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of a fellow member of the United Nations, Ukraine. That horrendous war has unleashed untold suffering and destroyed countless families, communities, and lives. Its cascading impacts has also spooked many developing countries in far-flung corners of the globe, unleashing acute shortages of essential commodities, triggering food insecurity and volatility in energy prices. It has even revived the unconscionable threat of nuclear war. We all want this war to end. It is an affront to everything that this organization and the UN Charter stands for. We need just and sustainable peace in Ukraine and elsewhere in the world, in line with international law and with the UN Charter. Peace must also be given a chance in other parts of the globe, from Africa to the Middle East. With the adoption of the Agenda 2063, Africa spelled a clear path for the Africa we want, and the continent still has a great chance to cut a corner in consolidating democracy and good governance. But the resurgence of coups in Africa is a regressive step, and the root causes of such alarming trends must be carefully analyzed and addressed. I urge you, member states, to use this high-level week not to fan the flames of conflict and hostility, but instead to opt for dialogue and diplomacy. We must remember that peace is an investment in our collective prosperity. I call on leaders to come together, to abide by the Charter, and support efforts to deliver a peaceful resolution to the war. Excellencies, yesterday we began our high-level week with the SDG Summit. It offered a prime moment to take stock of our successes and failures in delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. Front and center with the fact that 1.2 billion people are living in multidimensional poverty as of 2022. While some progress has been made on the goals, the summit is being convened in a context where there have been unacceptable delays and rollbacks. Let me be clear, we do not have the luxury of excuses, nor are we absolved of our responsibilities. The onus is on us, collectively, to make up for the lost momentum and work much harder in the remaining 7 years to accelerate progress on that which we have promised to deliver. The commitment to action presented at the summit should therefore be the tailwind to regain lost ground and supercharge implementation. Excellencies, the SDG Summit was only the start of what is a full agenda during High-Level Week. It naturally interlinks with the General Assembly's high-level dialogue on financing for development, which is key to accelerating the financing impetus for the SDGs. The preparatory ministerial meeting for the Summit of the Future will help to launch the negotiations of the Pact of the Future, giving guidance on how to ensure that the United Nations is fit for purpose in the 21st century. It will give member states the opportunity to come together and to transform our shared future. We will also see 3 health-related high-level meetings on pandemic prevention, preparedness and response, universal health coverage, and on tuberculosis, all of which offer us opportunities to better the lives of our global citizens. And the Secretary General's Climate Action Summit offers a moment to build political ambition ahead of COP28 in November. Tomorrow, I will also join hands with several heads of state and government to convene a breakfast summit to address the existential threats posed by sea level rise, an issue of significant concern to small island developing states, especially those in the Pacific region. Excellencies, allow me to pause here and to reiterate my deepest condolences to the governments and people of Morocco and Libya. The twin disasters of earthquakes and flooding have left thousands dead and untold more suffering. It is my sincere hope that resources and relief can be expedited to support all those who now find themselves in desperate need. As a citizen of a climate vulnerable region, I urge member states to recognize the continued and escalating impacts of climate change and to deliver real transformative results. Let us work together to unlock the finances and resources required to support those most vulnerable in mitigation, adaptation, and resilience building. And let us continue to work on the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index with the aim of moving beyond GDP to a measure of economic development and to remind ourselves that we are all born free and equal in dignity and in rights. As President of the 78th session, I am committed to championing vulnerable and marginalized groups, including indigenous peoples, peoples living with disabilities, and older persons. I have committed to ensure that we do not continue to neglect countries in special situations, and I intend to soon launch the high-level advisory group on LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS. But first and foremost, we need to work for all women and girls who are appallingly still struggling for equality and respect. We must walk the talk on gender equality and women's empowerment. This means according women full, equal, and meaningful participation at every level. As an international gender champion myself, I'm strongly committed to promoting gender equality and women's empowerment, and I have appointed a special envoy gender equality and women's empowerment, and I have appointed a special envoy and special advisor on gender equality and women's empowerment to assist me in this endeavor. Before I close, allow me to emphasize this. Despite the many and complex challenges we face, we do have the capacity to effect change, consequential change. We can make a meaningful difference to the lives of billions of people, if we so choose. We do not lack capacity. What we lack is the will to act. By putting aside our differences and bridging divides, we can deliver, we must deliver peace, progress, prosperity, and sustainability to everyone, everywhere. So let us step up and take action now. Let us re-energize the UN General Assembly and demonstrate our capacity and our will to deliver for all. In the words of Stephen Pressfield, an author born in Trinidad and Tobago, the most pernicious aspect of procrastination is that it can become a habit. We don't just put off our lives today, we put them off till our deathbed. Never forget, this very moment, we can change our lives. There never was a moment, and never will be, when we are without the power to alter our destiny. This second, we can turn the tables on resistance. This second, we can sit down and do our work. Excellencies, I thank you once again for your support to me and my presidency, and I wish you fruitful, productive, and healthy debate in the coming days. I thank you. Thank you. Before giving the floor to the first speaker for this morning, I would like to remind members that the list of speakers for the general debate has been established on the agreed basis that statements should be no longer than 15 minutes to enable all speakers to be heard at a given meeting. Within this time frame, I would like to appeal to speakers to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace so that interpretation into the other official UN languages may be provided properly. I would also like to draw your attention to the decision taken by the General Assembly at previous sessions, namely that the practice of expressing congratulations inside the General Assembly Hall after a speech has been delivered is strongly discouraged. After delivering their statements from the rostrum, speakers are invited to exit the General Assembly Hall through room GA 200, located behind the rostrum, before returning to their seats. May I take it that the General Assembly agrees to proceed in this manner? It is so decided. Finally, I should like to draw the attention of members that during the general debate, official photographs of all the speakers are taken by the Department of Global Communications. Members interested in obtaining these photographs are requested to contact the Photo Library of the United Nations. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
My greetings to the President of the General Assembly, Ambassador Dennis Francis from Trinidad, Tobago. It's a great pleasure to be preceded by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. I greet each of the heads of state and government and delegates present. I pay homage to our compatriot Sergio Vieira de Mello and 21 other employees of this organization, victims of the brutal attack in Baghdad 20 years ago. I also wish to express my condolences to the victims of the earthquake in Morocco and the storms that hit Libya. Like what happened recently in the state of Rio Grande do Sul in my country, these tragedies have claimed lives and causing irreparable losses. Our thoughts and prayers are with all the victims and their families. Ladies and gentlemen, exactly 20 years ago, I stood on this rostrum for the first time and said, on that September 23rd, 2003, my first words before this World Parliament be of confidence in the human capacity to overcome challenges and evolve towards superior forms of coexistence. I return today to say that I maintain my unshakable trust in humanity. At that time, the world had not yet realized the severity of the climate crisis. Today, it knocks on our doors, destroys our homes, our cities, our countries, kills and imposes losses and suffering on our brothers, especially the poorest. Hunger, the central theme of my speech at this World Parliament 20 years ago, today affects 735 million human beings who will go to sleep tonight without knowing if they'll have anything to eat tomorrow. The world is increasingly unequal. The 10 richest billionaires have more wealth than the poorest 40% of humanity. The destiny of every child born on this planet seems to be decided while they're still in their mother's womb. The part of the world where their parents live and the social class their family belongs to will determine whether or not that child will have opportunities throughout life. Whether they will eat at every meal or whether they will be denied the right to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. whether they will have access to health care, or whether they will fall to diseases that could have already been eradicated, whether they will finish school and get a quality job, or whether they will become part of the countless of unemployed, underemployed, and discouraged people. First of all, we must overcome resignation, which makes us accept such unfairness as a natural phenomenon. To overcome inequality, there's a lack of political will from those who govern the world in order to overcome inequality. Ladies and gentlemen, if today I return in the honorable capacity of President of Brazil, it is thanks to the victory won by democracy in my country. Democracy ensured that we overcame hate, misinformation, and oppression. Hope, once again, has won over fear. Our mission is to unite Brazil and rebuild a sovereign, fair, sustainable, supportive, with solidarity, generous, and a joyful country. Brazil is finding itself again with itself, with our region, with the world, and multilateralism. As I never tire of repeating, Brazil is back. Our country is back to make its due contributions in facing the major global Our country is back to make its due contribution in facing the major global challenges. We have reclaimed our foreign policy's universalism, marked by respectful dialogue with everyone. The international community is immersed in a whirlwind of multiple and simultaneous crises. The COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis, the food and energy insecurity have been amplified by growing geopolitical tensions. Racism, intolerance, xenophobia have spread, encouraged by new technologies created supposedly to bring us closer together. If we had to summarize these challenges in a single word, this challenge could be called, the reason for its challenge would be inequality. Inequality is at the root of this phenomena, or acts to aggravate them. The UN's broadest and most ambitious collective action aimed at development, the 2030 Agenda, could turn into its biggest failure. We have reached half of the implementation period and are still far from the defined goals. Most of the Sustainable Development Goals are moving at a slow pace. The moral and political imperative of eradicating poverty and ending hunger appears to have been numbed. In these 7 years that we have left, reducing inequalities within and between countries should become the core objective of the 2030 Agenda. Reducing inequalities within countries requires including the poor in government budgets and making the rich pay taxes that are proportional to their wealth. In Brazil, we are committed to implementing all the 17 SDGs in an integrated and indivisible manner. We want to achieve racial equality in Brazilian society through an 18th goal, which we will voluntarily adopt. We launched the Brazil Zero Hunger Plan, which will bring together a series of initiatives to reduce poverty and food insecurity. Amongst them is the Bolsa Família, the family stipend, which has become a global reference in income transfer programs for families that keep their children vaccinated and in school. Inspired by Brazilian Bertha Lutz, a pioneer as an advocate in gender equality in the UN Charter, we have passed a bill that makes equal pay between women and men mandatory when they perform the same role. We shall fight femicide and all forms of violence against women. we shall rigorously advocate for the rights of the LGBTQI plus groups and of people with disabilities. We have revived social participatory practices as a strategic tool for implementing public policies. Mr. President, acting against climate change involves thinking about tomorrow and facing historical inequalities. Rich countries grew based on a model with high rates of climate-damaging gas emissions. The climate emergency makes it urgent to correct course and implement what has already been agreed. There's no other reason why we speak of common but differentiated responsibilities. It is the vulnerable populations in the global south who are most affected by the loss and damage caused by climate change. The richest 10% of the world's population are responsible for almost half of all carbon released into the atmosphere. We, developing countries, do not want to repeat this model. In Brazil, we have already proven once and will prove again that a socially fair and environmentally sustainable model is possible. We are at the forefront of energy transition, and our matrix is already one of the cleanest in the world. 87% of our electrical power comes from clean and renewable sources. Solar, wind, biomass, ethanol, and biodiesel power generation is growing every year. The potential for generating green hydrogen is immense. With the Ecological Transformation Plan, we will invest in sustainable industrialization and sustainable infrastructure. We have resumed a sound and renewed Amazon agenda with oversight actions aimed at fighting environmental crimes. Over the last 8 months, deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon has already been reduced by 48%. The whole world has always talked about the Amazon. The whole world has always talked about the Amazon. Now, the Amazon is speaking for itself. A month ago, we hosted the Belém Summit meeting at the heart of the Amazon and launched a new collaboration agenda between countries that are part of that biome. There are 50 million South Americans living in the Amazon whose future depends on the decisive and coordination action of the countries that hold sovereignty over the region's territories. We all have also further dialogue with other countries that have tropical forests in Africa and Asia. We want to arrive at COP28 in Dubai with a joint vision that reflects, without any coaching, the priorities for preserving the Amazon, the Congo and Borneo Mekong basins based on our needs. Without mobilizing financial and technological resources, there's no way to implement what we decided in the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework. The promise to allocate $100 billion annually to developing countries remains just that, a long promise. Today, this amount would be insufficient for a demand that already reaches trillions of dollars. Mr. President, the principle on which multilateralism is based, that of sovereign equality between nations, has been eroding. At the main global governance levels, negotiations in which all countries have a voice and vote have lost momentum. When institutions reproduce inequalities, they are part of the problem, not the solution. Last year, the IMF made available $160 billion in special drawing rights to European countries and just $34 billion to African countries. The unequal and distorted representation of the management of the IMF and the World Bank is unacceptable. We have not corrected the excesses of market deregulation and the support of the ideology of the minimum state. The foundations of a new economic governance have not been laid. The BRICS was the result of this paralysis and constitute a strategic platform to promote cooperation between emerging countries. The recent expansion of the group at the Johannesburg Summit meeting strengthens the fight for an order which accommodates the economic, geographic, and political plurality of the 21st century. We are a force that works towards fairer global trade in the context of a serious crisis in multilateralism. Rich countries' protectionism has gained strength, and the World Trade Organization remains paralyzed, especially its dispute settlement system. Nobody remembers the Doha Development Round anymore. In the meantime, unemployment and precarious work has been undermining people's confidence in better times, especially the youth. Governments need to break away from the increasing dissonance between the voice of the markets and the voice of the streets. Neoliberalism has aggravated the economic and political inequality that plagues democracies today. Its legacy is a mass of disenfranchised and excluded people. Amidst the wreck, far-right adventurers emerge who deny politics and sell solutions that are easy as they are wrong. Many have fallen to the temptation of replacing failed neoliberalism with primitive, conservative, and authoritarian nationalism. We repudiate an agenda that uses immigrants as scapegoats, undermines the welfare state, and attacks workers' rights. We need to reclaim the best humanist traditions which inspired the creation of the UN. No relevant economical, social, active inclusion policies at cultural, education, and digital levels are fundamental for promoting democratic values and defending the rule of law. Preserving press freedom is essential. A journalist like Julian Assange cannot be punished informing society in a transparent and legitimate way. Our fight is against misinformation and cybercrimes. Apps and platforms should not abolish the labor laws we fought so hard for. Upon taking over as the chair of the G20 next December, we will spare no effort to place the fight against inequality in all its dimensions at the core of the international agenda. Under the motto, Building a Just World and a Sustainable Planet, the Brazilian chair will coordinate social inclusion and fight against hunger, sustainable development, and reform of global governance institutions. Mr. President, there will be no sustainability or prosperity without peace. Armed conflicts are an offense to human rationality. We know the horrors and suffering produced by all wars. Promoting a culture of peace is a duty for all of us. Building it requires persistence and vigilance. It is disturbing to see that old unresolved disputes persist and new threats emerge or gain force. The difficulty of guaranteeing the creation of a state for the Palestinian people clearly shows this. Added to this case, the persevering humanitarian crisis in Haiti, the conflict in Yemen, threats to Libyan national unity, and institutional ruptures in Burkina Faso, Gabon, Guinea, Conakry, Mali, Niger, and Sudan. In Guatemala, there's a risk of a coup d'etat, which would prevent the winner of the democratic elections from taking office. The war in Ukraine exposes our collective inability to enforce the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. We do not underestimate the difficulties in achieving peace. but no solution will be lasting if it is not based on dialogue. I have reiterated that work needs to be done to create space for negotiations. A lot is invested in weapons and very little in development. Last year, military spending totaled over $2 trillion. Expenditures on nuclear weapons reached $83 billion, a value 20 times higher than the regular UN budget. Stability and security will not be achieved where there is social exclusion and inequality. The UN was born to be the home of understanding and dialogue. The international community must choose. On one hand, there is the expansion of conflicts, the furthering of inequalities, and the erosion of the rule of law. On the other, the renewing of multilateral institutions dedicated to promoting peace. Unilateral sanctions cause great harm to the population of affected countries. In addition to not achieving their alleged goals, they hinder the mediation and prevention processes and the peaceful resolution of conflicts. Brazil will continue to reject measures taken without support from the UN Charter, such as the economic and financial embargo imposed on Cuba and the attempt to classify this country as a state sponsor of terrorism. We shall continue to criticize any attempts to divide the world into zones of influence and reviving the Cold War. The UN Security Council has been progressively losing its credibility. This frailty is the specific result of actions from its permanent members who wage unauthorized wars aimed at territorial expansion or regime change. Its paralysis is the most eloquent proof of the urgent need to reform it, which will bring it greater representation and efficacy. Ladies and gentlemen, inequalities needs to inspire outrage over hunger, poverty, war, disrespect for human beings. Moved by the power of outrage, we may act willingly and unwavering in fighting inequality and effectively transforming the world around us. The UN needs to fulfill its role as a builder of a world with more solidarity, fraternity, and fairness. But it would only do so if its members have the courage to proclaim their discontent at inequality and work tirelessly to overcome it. And I will just to say thank you very much to all of you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federative Republic of Brazil for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. Yes? Yeah. The Assembly will hear an address from His Excellency Joseph R. Biden, Jr., President of the United States. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Joseph R. Biden, Jr., President of the United States of America, and I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, my fellow leaders, about a week ago, I stood on the other side of the world, in Vietnam, on soil once bloody with war. And I met a small group of veterans, Americans and Vietnamese, who witnessed, and I watched the exchange of personal artifacts from that war, identification cards and a diary. It was deeply moving to see the reaction of the Vietnamese and American soldiers. Culmination of 50 years of hard work on both sides to address the painful legacies of war and to choose to work together toward peace and a better future. Nothing about that journey was inevitable. For decades, it would have been unthinkable for an American president to stand in Hanoi alongside a Vietnamese leader and announce a mutual commitment to the highest level of country's partnership. But it's a powerful reminder that our history need not dictate our future. With the concerted leadership and careful effort, adversaries can become partners. Overwhelming challenges can be resolved, and deep wounds can heal. So let us never forget that. When we choose to stand together and recognize the common hopes that bind all humanity, we hold our hands the power to bend that arc of history. My fellow leaders, we gather once more at an inflection point in world history, with the eyes of the world upon all of you, all of us. As President of the United States, I understand the duty my country has to lead in this critical moment, to work with countries in every region, linking them in common cause, to join together with partners who share a common vision of the future of the world, where our children do not go hungry and everyone has access to quality health care, where workers are empowered and our environment is protected, where entrepreneurs and innovators everywhere can access opportunity everywhere, where conflicts are resolved peacefully and countries can chart their own course. The United States seeks a more secure, more prosperous, more equitable world for all people because we know our future is bound to yours. Let me repeat that again. We know our future is bound to yours. And no nation can meet the challenges of today alone. The generations that preceded us organized this body, the United Nations, and built international financial institutions and multilateral and regional bodies to help take on the challenges of their time. It wasn't always perfect. But working together, the world made some remarkable and undeniable progress that improved the lives of all people. We avoided the renewal of global conflict while lifting more than 1 billion people out of extreme poverty. We together expanded access to education for millions of children. We saved tens of millions of lives that would have otherwise been lost to preventable and treatable diseases like measles, malaria, tuberculosis. HIV/AIDS infections and deaths plummeted, in no small part because of PEPFAR's work in more than 55 countries, saving more than 25 million lives. It's a profound testament what we can achieve when we act together, when we take on tough challenges, and an admonition for all of us to urgently accelerate our progress so that no one's left behind, because too many people are being left behind. The institutions we built together at the end of the Second World War are an enduring bedrock of our progress, and the United States is committed to sustaining them. And this year, we're proud to rejoin UNESCO. We also recognize that to meet the new challenges of our decades-old institutions and approaches, they must be updated to keep peace with the world. We have to bring in more leadership and capability that exists everywhere, especially from regions that have not always been fully included. We have to grapple with the challenges that are more connected and more complex. And we have to make sure we're delivering for people everywhere, not just somewhere, everywhere. Simply put, the 21st century results are badly needed. They're needed to move us along. That starts with the United Nations, starts right here in this room. In my address to this body last year, I announced the United States will support expanding the Security Council, increasing the number of permanent and non-permanent members. The United States has undertaken serious consultation with many member states, and will continue to do our part to push more reform efforts forward, look for points of common ground, and make progress in the year ahead. We need to be able to break the gridlock that too often stymies progress and blocks consensus on the Council. We need more voices, more perspectives at the table. The United Nations must continue to preserve peace, prevent conflict, and alleviate human suffering. And we embrace nations stepping up to lead in new ways and to seek new breakthroughs on hard issues. For example, on Haiti, the Caribbean community is facilitating a dialogue among Haitian society. I think now the people of Haiti cannot wait much longer. The United States is working across the board to make global institutions more responsive, more effective, and more inclusive. For example, we've taken significant steps to reform and scale up the World Bank, expanding its financing to low and middle-income countries so it can help boost progress toward meeting the Sustainable Development Goals and better address interconnected challenges like climate change and fragility. Under the new president of the World Bank, change is already taking root. Last month, I asked the United States Congress, the major economies of the world, to mobilize even more funding. Collectively, we can deliver a transformational boost to World Bank lending. And because the multilateral development banks are among the best tools we have for mobilizing transparent, high-quality investment in developing countries, reforming these institutions can be a game changer. Similarly, we proposed making sure developing countries have a strong voice and representation at the International Monetary Fund. We're going to continue our efforts to reform the World Trade Organization, preserve competition, openness, transparency, and the rule of law, while at the same time equipping it to better tackle modern-day imperatives like driving the clean energy transition, protecting workers, promoting inclusive and sustainable growth. And this month, we strengthened the G20 as a vital forum, welcoming the African Union as a permanent member. By upgrading and strengthening our institutions, that's only half of the picture. We must also forge new partnerships, confront new challenges. Emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence hold both enormous potential and enormous peril. We need to be sure they are used as tools of opportunity, not as weapons of oppression. Together with leaders around the world, the United States is working to strengthen rules and policies so AI technologies are safe before they're released to the public. To make sure we govern this technology, not the other way around, having it govern us. And I'm committed to working through this institution and other international bodies and directly with leaders around the world, including our competitors, to ensure we harness the power of artificial intelligence for good while protecting our citizens from its most profound risk. It's going to take all of us. I've been working on this for a while, as many of you have. It's going to take all of us to get this right. In every region of the world, the United States is mobilizing strong alliances, versatile partnerships, common purpose, collective action to bring new approaches to our shared challenges. Here in the Western Hemisphere, we united 21 nations in support of the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection, launching a region-wide approach to a region-wide challenge to better uphold laws and protect the rights of migrants. In the Indo-Pacific, we've elevated our Quad partnership with India, Japan, and Australia to deliver concrete progress for the people of the region on everything from vaccines to maritime security. Just yesterday, after 2 consultations in diplomacy, the United States brought together dozens of nations across 4 continents to establish a new partnership for Atlantic cooperation so that the coastal Atlantic countries can better cooperate on science, technology, environmental protection, and sustainable economic development. We brought together nearly 100 countries in a global coalition to counter fentanyl and synthetic drugs to reduce the human cost of this affliction, and it is real. And as the nature of the terrorist threats evolve and the geography expands to new places, we're working with our partners to bring capabilities to bear to disrupt plotting, degrade networks, and protect all of our people. Additionally, we convened the Summit for Democracy to strengthen democratic institutions, root out corruption, and reject political violence. And in this moment where democratically elected governments have been toppled in quick succession in West and Central Africa, we're reminded that this work is as urgent and important as ever. We stand with the African Union and ECOWAS and other regional bodies to support constitutional rule. We will not retreat from the values that make us strong. We will defend democracy, our best tool to meet the challenges we face around the world. And we're working to show how democracy can deliver in ways that matter to people's lives. The Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment addresses the enormous need and opportunity for infrastructure investment in low and middle income countries, particularly in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Through strategic, targeted public investments, we can unlock enormous amounts of private sector financing. The G7 has pledged to work with parties to collectively mobilize $600 billion in infrastructure financing by 2027. The United States has already mobilized more than $30 billion to date. We're creating a race to the top with projects that have high standards for workers, the environment, and intellectual property while avoiding the trap of unsustainable debt. We're focusing on economic corridors that will maximize the impact of our collective investment and deliver consequential results across multiple countries and multiple sectors. For example, the Libido Corridor will extend across Africa from the western port of Angola to the DRC to Zambia, boosting regional connectivity and strengthening commerce and food security in Africa. Similarly, the groundbreaking effort we announced at the G20 to connect India to Europe through the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel will spur opportunities and investment across 2 continents. This is part of our effort to build a more sustainable, integrated Middle East. It demonstrates how Israel's greater normalization and economic connection with his neighbors, is delivering positive and practical impacts even as we continue to work tirelessly to support a just and lasting peace between the Israelis and Palestinians, 2 states for 2 people. Now, let me be clear. None of these partnerships are about containing any country. They're about a positive vision for our shared future. When it comes to China, I want to be clear and consistent. We seek to responsibly manage the competition between our countries so it does not tip into conflict. I've said we are for de-risking, not decoupling with China. We will push back on aggression and intimidation and defend the rules of the road, from freedom of navigation to overflight to level economic playing field that have helped safeguard security and prosperity for decades. But we also stand ready to work together with China on issues where progress hinges on our common efforts. Nowhere is that more critical than accelerating the climate crisis, than the accelerating climate crisis. We see it everywhere. Record-breaking heat waves in the United States and China, wildfires ravaging North America and Southern Europe, a 5th year of drought in the Horn of Africa, tragic, tragic flooding in Libya. My heart goes out to the people of Libya. That's killed thousands of people. Together, these snapshots tell an urgent story of what awaits us if we fail to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and begin to climate-proof the world. For one day, my administration, the United States, has treated this crisis as an existential threat from the moment we took office, not only for us, but for all of humanity. Last year, I signed into law in the United States the largest investment ever anywhere in the history of the world to combat the climate crisis and help move the global economy toward a clean energy future. We're also working with the Congress to quadruple our climate financing to help developing countries reach their climate goals and adapt to climate impacts. And this year, the world's on track to meet the climate finance pledge that made under the Paris Agreement, $100 billion to raise collectively. But we need more investment from public and private sector alike, especially in places that have contributed so little to global emissions, but face some of the worst effects of climate change, like the Pacific Islands. The United States is working directly with the Pacific Island Forum to help these nations adapt, build resilience to the climate impacts, even as we lead the effort to build innovative new partnerships that attack the global challenges from all sides. From the First Movers Coalition, which is mobilizing billions of private sector community and the private sector commitments, to creating a market demand for green products in carbon-intense sectors like concrete, shipping, aviation, and trucking, to the Agricultural Innovation Mission for Climate, which is bringing farmers into the climate solution and making our food supply more resilient to climate shocks, and the Global Methane Pledge, now endorsed by more than 150 countries, which expands our focus beyond our carbon emission targets to reduce the potential greenhouse gases in our atmosphere by 30% in this decade. It's all within our capacity. We need to bring the same commitment and urgency and ambition as we work together to meet the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. These goals were adopted at the United Nations in 2015 as a roadmap for improving lives around the world. But the hard truth is, for decades of progress, the world has lost ground these past years in the wake of COVID-19, conflicts, and other crises. The United States is committing to doing its part to get us back on track. All told, in the first 2 years of my administration, the United States has invested more than $100 billion to drive development progress in bolstering food security, expanding access to education worldwide, strengthening healthcare systems, and fighting disease. And we've helped mobilize billions more in the private sector investments. But to accelerate our forward progress, on the Sustainable Development Goals. We all have to do more. We need to build new partnerships that change the way we tackle this challenge, to unlock trillions of additional financing for development, drawing on all sources. We need to fill the gaps and address the failures of our existing system exposed by the pandemic. We need to ensure that women and girls benefit fully from our progress. We must also do more to grapple with the debt that holds back so many low and middle income countries. When nations are forced to service unsustainable debt payments over the needs of their own people, it makes it harder for them to invest in their own futures. And as we work together to recover from global shocks, the United States will also continue to be the largest single country donor of humanitarian assistance at this moment of unparalleled need in the world. Folks, cooperation, partnership, these are the keys to progress on the challenges that affect us all, and the baseline for responsible global leadership. We don't need to agree on everything to keep moving forward on issues like arms control, a cornerstone of international security. After more than 50 years of progress under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Russia is shredding long-standing arms control agreements, including announcing the suspension of the New START and withdrawing from the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty. I view it as irresponsible and makes the entire world less safe. The United States is going to continue to pursue good faith efforts to reduce the threat of weapons of mass destruction and lead by example, no matter what else is happening in the world. This year, we safely destroyed at least the last chemical munitions in the U.S. stockpile, fulfilling our commitment toward a world free of chemical weapons. And we condemn the DPRK's continued violation of UN Security Council resolutions, but we are committed to diplomacy that will bring about the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We're working with our partners to address Iran's destabilizing activities that threaten regional and global security, and remain steadfast in our commitment that Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. Now, even as we evolve our institutions and drive creative new partnerships, let me be clear. Certain principles of our international system are sacrosanct. Sovereignty, territorial integrity, human rights. These are the core tenets of the UN Charter, the pillars for peaceful relations among nations, without which we cannot achieve any of our goals. That has not changed, and that must not change. Yet, for the second year in a row, this gathering, dedicated to peaceful resolution of conflicts, is darkened by the shadow of war. An illegal war of conquest brought without provocation by Russia against its neighbor Ukraine. Like every nation in the world, the United States wants this war to end. No nation wants this war to end more than Ukraine. And we strongly support Ukraine in its efforts to bring about a diplomatic resolution that delivers just and lasting peace. But Russia alone bears responsibility for this war. Russia alone has the power to end this war immediately. And it's Russia alone that stands in the way of peace, because Russia's price for peace is Ukraine's capitulation, Ukraine's territory, and Ukraine's children. Russia believes that the world will grow weary and allow it to brutalize Ukraine without consequence. But I ask you this: if we abandon the core principles of the United States to appease an aggressor, can any member state in this body feel confident that they are protected? If we allow Ukraine to be carved up, is the independence of any nation secure? I'd respectfully suggest the answer is no. We have to stand up to this naked aggression today and deter other would-be aggressors tomorrow. That's why the United States, together with our allies and partners around the world, will continue to stand with the brave people of Ukraine as they defend their sovereignty and territorial integrity and their freedom. It's not only an investment in Ukraine's future, but in the future of every country that seeks a world governed by basic rules that apply equally to all nations and uphold the rights of every nation, no matter how big or small. Sovereignty, territorial integrity, they are the fixed foundations of this noble body. And universal human rights is its North Star. We cannot sacrifice either. 75 years ago, Universal Declaration of Human Rights captured a remarkable act of collective hope. I say that again, collective hope. Drafted by a committee representing different regions, faiths, philosophies, and adopted by the entire General Assembly. The rights contained in the Declaration are elemental and enduring. And while we still struggle to uphold equal and inalienable rights of all, they remain ever steady and ever true. We cannot turn away from abuses, whether in Xinjiang, Tehran, Darfur, or anywhere else. We have to continue working to ensure that women and girls enjoy equal rights and equal participation in their societies, that indigenous groups, racial, ethnic, religious minorities, people with disabilities do not have their potential stifled by systemic discrimination, that the LGBTQI plus people are not prosecuted or targeted with violence because of who they are. These rights are part of our shared humanity. They're absent when they're absent anywhere. Their loss is felt everywhere. They are essential by whether or not we live up to the promises we made to ourselves, to each other, to the most vulnerable. And to all those who will inherit the world we create, because that's what, and to defend the tenets of the United Nations. There can only be one answer to that question. We must, and we will. The road ahead is long and difficult, but if we persevere, and prevail, if we keep the faith in ourselves, and show what's possible, let's do this work together.